Hey everyone, Camber here, showing you how to use your camera to make good videos. And getting a new camera is always really exciting, but it can also be a bit overwhelming once you start sifting through all the menus, trying to figure out which settings that you should use. So I'm gonna give you a little shortcut by showing you my settings on the Sony FX3 to help get you on your way to making more cinematic videos. So let's get this turned on and jump right into the menus. Starting out, we have the My Menu section, which is a customizable setting so you can get to the things you use most often easily, and I will cover that at the end. So starting out, we have file format. XAVC-S 4K is what I typically use. You have lots of different options here. SI is going to be higher quality, but let me show you real quick what happens when you do that. So I have 24p, 100 megabits per second, 422 10-bit is my typical when I'm shooting 4K, but if you go to XAVC-SI, which is over 2 times more data, it requires a lot more space. I will use this for more important things like maybe a wedding or short film, but just for my regular YouTube videos, XAVC-S is plenty, and I have another video you can check out explaining about the difference between SI, intra-frame recording, and IPB settings and how that'll affect your videos that you can check out to better understand that. But 24p is my normal, then obviously you have 60 and 120p you can do on this camera, which is really nice, but 24 frames per second is normally my base. Slow and quick, I don't use this setting at all because I'll set my own 60 or 120 frames per second and then slow it down in post as I want. Proxy settings I have set to off, but you can turn this on, and what it basically does is records another file, as you can see here at 720, only 6 megabits per second, 428-bit. So when you're editing, you can edit these files and it is a lot less taxing on your computer, and then you can go in and apply all of your edits to your main files, but my computer can handle the files that I do right now, so it's not an issue for me. APS-C shooting is off, but you can use this if you're in HD mode to punch in an extra 50% when you're shooting stuff, but in 4K, this camera sensor is actually a 4K sensor. It's using the entire sensor with no downsampling, so you can't use it unless you're in HD. Lens compensation, I just have everything set to auto, so if it detects the type of lens you're using, it'll compensate as needed. Then format, that's just if you're formatting your memory cards. Record media settings, I have slot 1 is the priority, and then recording mode is simultaneous to both cards for both pictures and videos. If you had it set to one over the other, then you could have auto switch on, so once one card fills up, it'll automatically start recording to the next one. Can recover image database, media info for your cards. File settings, if you want to go in and change how your files are named, you can do that, but I don't really care. Exposure mode, I am always in manual. I do not use these auto modes. Manual is what I go for. And you can change the different options you have if you're not doing manual, but as I said, I'm always shooting in manual. Camera set memory. Now, this is a really important section. You can go in and preset different modes. So for example, when I'm shooting right now, I have set XAVC-S 4K 24 frames per second. You can see it's 422 10-bit. Now I can click on mode here, and I can go down to memory 1, click on that. Now I have XAVC-S 4K 60p 422 10-bit with 125 on the shutter speed for the 180-degree rule. Picture profile 8 set down here, so I can quickly change between 24 frames per second and 60 so that I can get slow motion footage and then go right back to where I was. Then I have number 2 set, XAVC-S HD 24p 420 8-bit, and I have 1/50th on the shutter speed, and I use that for my fitness videos because I don't need as high quality. And then the same thing, memory 3, I have 60p XAVC-S HD with the same 180-degree rule on the shutter speed so that I can get slow motion footage in the HD, because as I said, I don't need as high quality for those videos as I do with these. But then I go to my normal video setting and I am back shooting XAVC-S 4K 24p, so it just makes it really easy going in here and setting all these different modes. And there's 4 more you can do, so you can get really in depth if you're shooting live somewhere maybe and you have multiple areas of different lighting set up. You can set all of those ahead of time so you can quickly scroll through and not have to be going through the menus to change your settings. The memory recall media slot 1, so when you're watching a playback, it's pulling it from card number 1. Silent mode settings, I don't mess with that. Release without lens is enable. Audio recording set to on. The level is basically depends on the type of microphone you're using and what you need. Audio out timing is live. I have noise reduction off because I don't want it doing any of that processing for me. The The audio level display is on, so when we're looking here, you have the audio level right there and you can monitor it. Time code and user bit presets, I just leave like that. I don't mess with those. Time code run, record run. We have this preset and off. Steady shot set to standard, and I have a button programmed where I can turn that on and off. The steady shot works great. On this camera, it punches in just a little bit, but it makes it super stable even when handheld. I have it set to auto because all of my lenses are compatible, so it automatically knows how to stabilize based on the focal length I'm using. But if you're using a non-compatible lens with maybe an adapter, you can come down here and you can change, put in whatever focal length you're using, and it'll stabilize based on that lens. But I don't need that because my lenses are compatible. So zoom range, with this, you have the option of choosing optical only. So if you have a zoom lens, it'll only use what your zoom lens can do. Clear image zoom is where you can punch in up to 50% with pretty much no noticeable loss in quality. But then digital zoom is where you punch in even further and you do start to get that cheap look. So clear image zoom, I like to keep that on there, and I will show you in a little bit how I have that program to use. But you can change zoom speeds here. There's lots of custom settings, slow and fast. You can program buttons to do all that, and it just depends on the equipment you have. Grid line display is on with the rule of thirds grid. I always use because I like having rule of thirds in there to help frame my shots. Emphasize record display. Essentially what happens is when you press record, this red box shows up, which is nice to have to help you know that you are in fact recording. Marker display is set to off, but when I turn that on, when we come back to here, you can see now I have these lines here, and that is to help frame my shots based on the 2:35:1 aspect ratio so that I don't cut out anything that's important in my frame if I know I'm going to be changing to that aspect ratio when I get to editing. And you can change to a different aspect ratio marker, all these different ones, super useful to have, and there's other guide frames, safety zones, all that type of stuff if you're using a marker for different aspect ratios. Now auto slow shutter I have off, that's if you're in an auto mode, but like I said, I'm always shooting in manual. ISO, you can change it here, but I have buttons programmed to do that, which we'll go over in a bit. The range limit is right there, so if you were using auto settings, you could set the minimum and maximum ISOs that it will use, and I don't mess with that. I like to have third exposure steps, but you can change it to half if you prefer that. I don't do that. Metering mode is spot, which is what I typically use. I will switch back and forth between multi and spot sometimes, but most of the time it's spot. And the nice thing is you can also change to a large dot or a standard smaller size. Face priority and multi-metering I have off because, as I was saying, I typically use spot metering so that I can make sure I'm exposing skin properly, and I don't want it to do that if I'm in multi because I'm looking at the overall scene. The spot metering point you can change where you want it, but I have it in center. White balance, I'm typically always using Kelvin. Sometimes I'll use custom if I have a gray card and I'm doing something like a short film where I have time to set up for the best color that I can get, but Kelvin works for me most of the time, or you can use one of the mini presets in the camera. Priority set and auto white balance, I just have standard because I don't use auto white balance. And it also has shockless white balance, so basically if you're going from one scene to another, indoors to outdoors, it'll make a slow gradual change if you have it on this setting to your white balance if you're using auto, but I just don't use auto, so I don't run into that issue. Dynamic range optimizer I've set to off because I don't want it doing extra processing in camera. Creative look is set to standard, so that's just what I use if I'm not using a picture profile, but I do typically use picture profiles, and I like to use picture profile 8, and I have the gamma switch to Cine 4. Now you can have this on S-Log 2 or 3 and it'll give you even better quality, but you have a higher base ISO, and Cine 4 is pretty easy to color grade for my normal shots, but I will use S-Log if I have a more important shoot that I really want the best quality for. And so now we have picture profile 8 set. When you have that, these go away. So zebra display is off. When it's turned on, I have it set to 100 plus, so anything at 100 or over that's overexposed will show hash lines in the video, which makes it easy to see what in your shot is overexposed quickly. Focus modes, I typically always use continuous autofocus if I'm not in manual. We have transition speed, so if you clicked on one thing and click to another, that'll change how fast it does that rec. Then also the shift subject sensitivity, this just determines how much it'll stay locked onto one thing or switching quickly between various objects. Focus area, I usually have it set to wide, but as you can see here, there's lots of different settings you can have in there, and you can uncheck things that you'd never use. I just leave them all checked because I'm pretty much always in wide, so it doesn't really matter to me. Have this set to white. Do not circulate on the focus point auto frame, I don't mess with that there. Eye, face, priority, and autofocus I have on, human, auto for whichever eye it detects. I like to have this on because it shows a box over people's faces or eyes, so you definitely for sure know what it's focusing on when you're in autofocus, and you can register faces priority if you want. Focus magnifier, you can punch in 4 times to check the focus and make sure it's on what you want. I've set it to no time limit because I'll turn it off myself when I'm done. And initial focus is 4. You can set it to 1, but it's kind of useless to me because if you're going to punch in, why are you going to have to click 2 buttons? I just do that so it goes straight to 4. Peaking I have on, level is high, and color is red, and you can change the color depending, if you have a red scene, you might want a different color for peaking. But I have the display set to on. It's not on when you're in autofocus, but as soon as I switch to manual focus, then the peaking will automatically turn on, so it helps me get focus spot on. Now in this section, this is all playback settings. You can pretty much set this to how you want. I don't mess with anything in this, so that's just as you prefer. And the same with this section, the only thing I really do in here is I turn Bluetooth off as well as have airplane mode on because I don't want it wasting battery while it's searching for signals. Now here, for area and date, obviously I have English for my language. You can set your date and time. I'm in NTSC. You can save your settings to the camera if you want, which can be helpful if you have multiple people using the same camera, since it is so customizable. And speaking of customization, I don't really customize any pictures because I only take pictures pretty much for thumbnails. But when I come into here for video settings, I have ISO set to this dial here, so I use this for ISO up and down. Focus magnifier, right here, like I said, it punches in that 4 times to check your focus. Marker display right here, that'll put those lines of the 235 to 1 or whatever other setting you'd have. Steady shot is the middle button, so I can click that, turn steady shot on and off easily. Zebra display select, pretty much this camera has some things already labeled, so I just left it there. Zebra's there on the left. Peaking display, I left it there on the right. And I just put that because to me, that just makes it easier. Since it's already labeled that, I just put it like that. Then audio record level I put on the bottom because I have shutter speed set to the front of the camera. Record frame rate, there's a button up here that I didn't really have anything else I wanted to customize, so I put that so if I wanted to, I could quickly change to another frame rate, but I rarely ever use that at all. White balance, right here, there's a button up here. It is actual labeled WB, and then there's an ISO button, but since I have ISO set to here, I have that set as my metering mode. It's labeled as the number 3 up there. Focus standard is 4 here. I use that for pictures. So when I click that, it'll focus on the middle of the screen where the box is. Movie shooting, there's a giant record button up there. Autofocus manual focus selector toggle, there's a button down here in the front that says record, but I just use the record button up here, and that one I can easily turn the manual focus on and off. Like with the 50mm lens I have here, it doesn't have an auto manual focus switch on there. Then also there's a focus hold button, which I don't really use because most of my lenses don't even have that. And then for function menu settings, I'm just going to click on function to show you. I have autofocus transition speed, the subject shift sensitivity, focus areas, zebra levels, my picture profiles with the gamma display assist. I'll cover that in a minute. Peaking display with the level and the color, the audio record level, the steady shot, and then the APS-C shooting. So if I am in HD, I can access that right there. And this is just helpful, if someone else is using your camera, most of the settings you need are going to be right there. So you can have different settings for still and movies, which I do, but if you wanted it all to be the same, you could do that as well. For the display, you can go in here and choose what things are going to show up on your screen. Like histogram, I never really use, so you can uncheck the things that you don't need. Record with shutter is off. Zoom, ring, rotate, that's NA for this. Lens. My dial settings, you can customize that, but I haven't touched it. Dial setup, so right here is my aperture, and the wheel on the front is my shutter speed. I have the rotation direction as normal. EB comp is off. Lock operation parts is off, so essentially I can hit record and I can still change all my ISO, shutter speed, all that type of stuff if I want while it's still recording. Touch operation on with sensitivity set to standard, and touch focus and shooting. Now here is really useful. You have touch focus, so you can touch something, it focuses on that, and you can touch something else and it'll rack focus. Super helpful, but you also have touch tracking, so you can touch an object and a little box will appear over it, and it'll track that throughout your frame so that it stays locked on to whatever that thing is that you chose. But touch focus is what I typically use most often. Monitor brightness I have set to manual and full bright. display quality high. Now when you first get your camera, it's going to be on standard, and if stuff doesn't look quite crisp to you, you can go to high. It's going to take a little bit more battery, but I like to have the best quality on my screen for focusing and just seeing how everything looks. Have this set to counter, gamma display assist. So I talked about this briefly. I have it set to on in auto, but normally when I have a picture profile on, let's say I'll be in S-Log2, and what happens is when you're shooting with a picture profile, you typically have a washed out image. So when you put this on, it basically puts a LUT on top of that so that you can see what it's going to look like. It really helps with exposure and white balance, because when it's washed out, it's just hard to get those things right, but it doesn't bake all that into the image, and you still get the more washed out image that the picture profile gives you when you get to editing, so you can get a lot more dynamic range and all that good stuff from your video. Remain shoot display is not displayed, auto review is off. Power save start time is 5 minutes, because I don't want to wait 30 minutes and kill a ton of battery if I have the camera on and I'm not using it. So 5 minutes, it'll start saving power and shut most of the stuff off. Auto power off temp. I've never had this camera overheat. It does have a fan in it, but I did set this to high just so that I have more time if needed. Volume settings, this just depends on playback and what you want. And for channel audio monitoring, I don't do much with this. It really depends on your equipment and what you have, but I suggest you look at Gerald Undun's video on this camera, because he breaks down these audio channels and how you can use them. Audio signals are on. USB connection is auto. We have multi and power on, so I can power it externally. HDMI resolution is auto. This all settings really depend on if you have a monitor set up and what kind of settings you need based on your equipment. HDMI info display is off, and I have control for HDMI on. Video light mode is power link, record lamp. I have all on, so essentially you have lights here on the record button, on the front, in multiple places to let you know that you are recording, but you can change only to front or all off. I like to have them all on, but if you're in a dark setting, you might want to turn them off so that you don't have red lights reflecting, but they are quite useful, because there have been many times when I thought I was recording and I wasn't, and that was a pain. Fan control. So there's a fan on this camera. It sticks out a little bit here, and you can see the vents for it. You can have on auto where it turns on when it needs. Minimum is where it's only going to do the minimum necessary. I have mine set to off in recording. So as soon as I hit record, the fan is going to turn off no matter how hot the camera gets. But as soon as I stop recording, the fan will kick on as needed to cool off the camera. Or you can turn it to always off if that's what you want. IR remote control is off, but if you have one, then you can use that to control your camera. Auto pixel mapping is on, which I don't use any of that. I'm not going to try to map any pixels myself. And then the version you can check for updates. So then we have the My Menu settings at the very top, and this is all touchscreen. However, I don't want to touch it and get smudges for this video. So as you saw, there's a lot of menu settings, and you can put in this section the things you use most often. So first off is formatting the cards, then the file format, 4K or HD. Then we have the movie settings for the different frame rates, picture profiles with the gamma display, the zebra display with the zebra levels. Next page, I have all the autofocus settings with the tracking, sensitivity, the speed, shift sensitivity, then all of the peaking settings. And then at the end, I have here the camera set memory, so I can go in here and change those quickly if I want. Now, the one thing that's really annoying that I wish this camera had is when it came into the touch operation, this one right here, this touch tracking, you cannot set this to any custom button on the camera or in the custom menu. I don't know why. I'd really like to have that so I can quickly switch between those modes. I don't use tracking very often, but not having to find where it is in the menu would be really helpful. But do what you got to do. I know where it is now, so I can get to it easily, but it still would be easy to be able to just click a button and then be able to change that as I want. But those are my FX3 cinematic video settings. Now I want to make it very clear that there is a lot more that goes into making videos look cinematic than just these settings on your camera. However, getting these settings right is the first step in that process of making better videos. But I also have lots of videos and playlists on the channel teaching you more cinematic techniques with lighting, framing, and much more. So be sure to check those out and you'll see your skills improve even faster. But if this video is helpful, then please help me out by leaving a like, subscribe if you're new, and leave any questions in the comments, and I'll try to clarify anything I can for you. And with that, I'll see you in the next one.